Long before the first metal hooks or carved canoes, native peoples of the Pacific Northwest and the Great Lakes lived by the rhythm of flowing water. Rivers, creeks, and tide flats were not simply landmarks. They were arteries of life that carried memory through every generation. Along these waters, the Coast Salish, Haida, and Ojibwe built seasonal villages, moving with the salmon as faithfully as the moon's cycles. Children learned early that water spoke in patterns. The scent of wet cedar before the salmon came, the hush that settled when the current deepened, the faint hiss of insects rising from the bank. Elders taught them that ripples were not random. Each widening ring revealed depth, each shift in current a hidden path. They learned to notice how moss bent with flow, how the breeze over the surface changed when fish gathered below. These signs were not superstition, but science carried in story. They mapped the river by rhythm and echo, never needing written charts or compasses. Where a modern eye might see stillness, an elder saw movement and time itself. To them, water was the first teacher and the oldest memory, whispering lessons to those who listened. To live beside water was to surrender to its rhythm. Every dawn began with quiet study, elders kneeling by the edge, testing temperature with their hands, reading the morning mist. A shift in scent or sound could tell whether salmon waited beyond the bend. Without nets or boats, fishing required patience and unity with the current. Hunters and gatherers moved like herons, bodies steady, shadows broken by reeds. They felt vibration through bare feet, attuned to the pulse beneath the riverbed. The smallest swirl might mark a feeding ground, a sudden silence, the presence of fish beneath. They waited, sometimes for hours, until sunlight flashed on scales like a signal. When a catch came, joy was quiet and reverent. The first fish was often returned to the water with thanks, its spirit believed to guide others home. Each family took only what could be dried or shared. Greed, they said, angered the river. The lesson endured, take less, and the waters would always give more. To master the river meant to obey its balance, to fish not as conquerors, but as kin shaped by the same flow that sustained them. Centuries later, the rivers still remember. Beneath moss-covered stones lie traces of weirs, fire pits, and smoke-darkened posts where families once stood. In fragments of bone tools and ash rests the quiet evidence of people who survived by listening. They measured time through ripples, not clocks, through spawning songs, not words. Their story endures in the patient logic of flowing water, in the turning seasons that still mirror their rhythm. To them, survival was remembrance, not invention. The river carried their stories forward just as it carried the salmon upstream, renewing both life and lesson in an endless circle of return. The river did not speak in words, yet the people understood it better than any written map. For the Coast Salish and Ojibwe, reading water was a skill as vital as breathing. Every ripple, sound, and colour shift carried meaning. They learned that clear water meant cold flow from mountain snowmelt, and murky water signalled spawning season. Fish followed these signs, and so did the people. Elders observed the way leaves drifted to gauge current speed. Hunters noticed how dragonflies gathered above deeper pools where fish hid. This observation was not luck, it was accumulated memory, shaped by generations who had watched the same currents for centuries. They saw how light on the water changed through the day, how wind pressed the surface into lines pointing toward feeding grounds. When birds flew low over the river, it meant life stirred below. These lessons were shared in evening stories beside the fire, where children memorized each sign the way others might learn letters. To survive, they had to read not pages but patterns. Each tribe developed its own vocabulary of the river, a living language without words, written only in motion, shadow, and sound. Long before formal science, native peoples practiced observation that rivaled precision instruments. They tracked fish not by tools, but by the alignment of stars and the temperature of wind rolling across the valley. The Coast Salish believed the river had moods, soft when the salmon returned, restless when storms brewed at sea. The Ojibwe listened to the tone of running water. A higher pitch meant fresh snowmelt, while a deeper hum warned of low oxygen that slowed the fish. These interpretations shaped when families moved camps or repaired traps. They used polished stones to test water clarity, or tied bark strips to branches to measure depth over time. Every natural sign became a signal in their internal calendar. To them, nature's behaviour was not random. it was conversation. Watching ripples at dawn was like hearing an old friend's voice. Through that connection, the people achieved balance, never overfishing, never wasting. They understood that to ignore the river's cues was to invite hunger. Knowledge of its rhythm kept them alive, long before any written record or measured tide chart. To read the river was to belong to it. These tribes never claimed mastery, only understanding. Each gesture, a finger dipped into the flow, a glance at a circling bird, was an act of dialogue. The river in return revealed where life moved unseen. Modern tools could measure flow but not respect. The ancients measured both. Their science carried spirit, their awareness carried survival. Through patience and humility, they turned observation into tradition, and tradition into life. In their silence, the river spoke clearly, and those who listened endured as long as its current flowed. Before nets or carved boats, native peoples shaped the river itself into their most reliable tool. Across the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes, generations of Coast Salish, Haida and Ojibwe families built stone weirs, low, V-shaped walls of rock stretching partway across a stream. When water flowed through, fish followed the current into narrowing gaps where they could be caught by hand or with woven baskets. These weirs were engineering masterpieces of patience and precision. Builders worked at low tide or during dry months, placing each stone by memory and instinct. They studied where the current slowed, where gravel gathered, and where fish naturally turned. The design required no rope or metal, only understanding. Every village maintained its own sections, repaired after storms and shared among families. No one claimed ownership of the river. The structure belonged to the community and the salmon alike. Even children helped carry stones, learning through rhythm and repetition. In this quiet labour, the people shaped more than a trap. They shaped sustainability. The river gave, but only when guided gently. Their weirs proved that survival could be built not on dominance, but on balance with the water's will. Far inland, Ojibwe builders adapted the same logic to lakes and creeks where salmon never swam. They built fence-like traps from willow branches and alder poles, weaving them into tight lattices that curved with the current. Fish, drawn by the moving shadows, entered small openings and became enclosed in hand-woven baskets of reeds. No nails, no rope, only pressure and pattern. The fences were living tools, flexing with the current and never blocking it completely. Each trap blended seamlessly into the environment, allowing smaller fish to pass while holding only what was needed. Some structures lasted years, others were dismantled after each season to let the water rest. Their designs varied across regions but shared one principle: never take more than nature offered. During the spawning months, entire families gathered to maintain the traps, singing rhythmically as they worked, the sound rising with the flow. For them, fishing was not a mechanical act, but a ritual of cooperation. When a trap filled, it was emptied together, hands, laughter, and water moving as one. Even centuries later, traces of those stone and wood patterns remain buried under silt and moss. Archaeologists find lines of rock still arranged in the same deliberate angles, silent diagrams of ancient intelligence. Each surviving curve tells a story, how people learned to build without harming, to guide without forcing. These weirs and traps were not inventions of convenience, but expressions of coexistence. The people did not command the river, they conversed with it, shaping flow and fate together. In those stones, the memory of that partnership still endures, whispering through the current. When the rivers deepened and the salmon ran thick, stone traps were not enough. The Coast Salish, Haida, and Ojibwe turned to tools shaped by hand and patience. Spears and harpoons made of bone, antler, and hardened wood. These were not crude weapons, but instruments of precision. Spears were carved from cedar or ash, then dried and hardened in firelight until their tips rang faintly when struck. Barbs of bone or sharpened antler were fitted with sinew, flexible and strong. Each tribe adapted the shape to its waters, long, narrow tips for shallow creeks, heavier prongs for deep currents. Hunters stood silently on slippery stones, their reflections merging with the fish below. To strike too soon meant failure, to strike too late meant hunger. Their skill was not strength alone, but rhythm, waiting for the pulse of the river to align with their heartbeat. In that moment, the spear was an extension of will and respect, piercing only what was needed. The tools they carried were not symbols of dominance, but bridges between human need and the living world beneath the surface. Along the coastal inlets, Haida fishers used multi-pronged harpoons with detachable heads, each carved from bone and lashed with spruce root fibre. When the tip pierced a salmon's side, it slipped free from the shaft and held firm by the line, allowing the hunter to pull gently without tearing the flesh. The technique required quiet mastery, a blend of timing, strength, and understanding of the fish's movement. Before dawn, hunters balanced on tide-wet rocks, their silhouettes still against the rising sun. Their spears shimmered faintly from the fire's curing, and the scent of smoke lingered on the wood. When the fish leapt, the hunter's motion was swift but measured, a single fluid arc. The first successful catch was lifted high, not as trophy, but as offering. Its bones were later returned to the current, carrying gratitude downstream. These rituals turned skill into reverence. For them, to fish was to renew a covenant, a reminder that life, when taken with care, remained abundant. Through craft and patience, they ensured that every season's return was not luck, but earned harmony. Centuries later, fragments of those spears remain buried near riverbeds, bone points polished by time, charred shafts hardened by ancient fires. Each remnant tells of a people who saw craftsmanship as prayer. Their tools were simple yet exact, refined through generations of observation. Unlike modern devices of extraction, these instruments carried restraint within their design. They reveal an intelligence grounded not in invention, but relationship, a technology of empathy. In each shard of bone, in each fire-darkened tip, endures the memory of hands that shape survival into art. Not every catch required a spear. In the shallow, sunlit streams and quiet inlets, patience and touch became the most valuable tools. Among the Coast Salish and Ojibwe, entire families practiced hand fishing, a method that relied on silence and sensitivity. Fish rested in cool, shaded eddies beneath roots and stones, and the people learned to sense them by feel. Hunters waded slowly, hands trailing in the current, fingertips brushing gravel until the faint tremor of scales betrayed a hiding place. The goal was not to seize, but to cradle, turning the fish gently so its gills met open air. Children often learned this skill first, guided by calm instruction and laughter that rippled across the morning water. It was less a hunt than a conversation, between human patience and animal stillness. Success depended on respect for rhythm. Even a misplaced shadow or careless splash could scatter the day's work. Those who mastered it were said to have hands that could hear, attuned to the river's pulse. This intimacy with water defined their survival as much as any tool, proving that gentleness could feed as surely as strength. In deeper creeks and bright bays, woven baskets became silent hunters beneath the midday sun. The Coast Salish crafted theirs from split cedar roots, while the Ojibwe used willow and bulrush stems soaked until pliable. Each weave was precise, shaped into a narrowing throat that allowed water to pass but fish to stay. Some were anchored with stone weights in the shallows, others floated with wooden collars that drifted with tidal flow along the coast, or wind-driven currents on the lakes. The process required more than craftsmanship, it demanded prediction. Builders studied how fish turned, how current curved, how sunlight bent through water. Then they shaped baskets to mirror those paths, guiding fish by instinct rather than force. When lifted, the catch shimmered in draining light, water streaming through in ribbons. No part was wasted, even broken fibres returned to the soil. Each pattern held lessons, refined through countless seasons and shared between generations. Success was never measured by numbers, but by endurance, ensuring there would be fish again when the next dawn came. Occasionally fragments of these baskets emerged from ancient riverbeds, darkened but intact. Their woven lines still curve with the grace of moving water. They speak of intelligence rooted in observation, of survival shaped by softness, not struggle. The simplest tools endured because they worked with nature's rhythm, not against it. Even in decay, the fibres breathe, returning to the earth they once borrowed from. These silent relics remind us that balance, not conquest, preserved life. Each thread once held both sustenance and respect, proof that harmony, once woven, can outlast time itself. Fresh fish meant survival for the day, but preservation meant survival for the winter. In the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes regions, the Coast Salish and Ojibwe mastered the art of turning a fleeting catch into enduring sustenance. Once caught, salmon or whitefish were cleaned beside the river, their flesh sliced thin and hung on cedar racks to dry under open daylight. Fires of alder or willow were kindled beneath, their smoke rising slow and steady. The process could last days. Women tended the fires, adjusting distance and wood type to flavour the meat while keeping insects away. Children fanned smoke with evergreen branches to keep it even. The air grew thick with a sweet, earthy scent, the smell of patience and skill. Nothing was wasted. Bones were boiled into broth, skins used for oil or glue. Each family had its own smokehouse, built with slatted cedar walls to let air pass through. Inside, strips of fish glowed amber as smoke curled upward like a silent blessing. Through this ritual, food became memory, every piece holding the warmth of fire, the rhythm of the river, and the quiet assurance that the people would endure the cold. Farther east, among the Ojibwe, preservation followed the same spirit but different rhythm. Fish were sometimes brined in wooden troughs before smoking, packed with layers of salt harvested from inland deposits or traded from other villages. In the Great Lakes winds, racks lined the shores where sunlight mingled with drifting smoke. Women sang softly while working, songs meant to honour the spirits of the animals that gave nourishment. Nearby, elders carved wooden stakes to hang new catches, the sound of their knives joining the hum of the wind. Smokehouses built from birch bark and sapling frames dotted the riverbanks, their faint trails visible for miles. The process wasn't merely technical, it was communal. Families shared their fires and watched over one another's food as storms rolled in. Each smoked catch carried a story of weather, patience, and gratitude. When winter froze the lakes, the preserved fish fed the village, proof that foresight was the truest form of strength. In this balance between preparation and respect, survival became a song repeated with every rising column of smoke. Long after the fires have died, traces of smoke still cling to the cedar beams of ancient shelters. The scent endures in artifacts unearthed along riverbanks, faint, resinous, eternal. These remains speak of a people who transformed impermanence into endurance. Smoke was their signature, rising each season as both offering and promise. It carried their wisdom skyward, reminding all who watched that life preserved with care could outlast time itself. The river gave the fish, the people gave gratitude, and the smoke gave memory. A cycle as steady as the current and as enduring as breath. For the Coast Salish and Ojibwe, fishing was never only about food. It was a sacred exchange, an act of gratitude as vital as the catch itself. Before the first fish of the season was taken, offerings were made, a carved cedar chip, a pinch of crushed berries, or a quiet prayer whispered to the current. The people believed that fish carried spirits who remembered kindness and would return year after year if treated with respect. Elders led small ceremonies at dawn, touching the water with cedar boughs to awaken its guardians. The first salmon was never eaten right away. It was placed upon a bed of ferns, sprinkled with river water, and returned downstream after the tribe had given thanks. This ritual, simple but profound, reminded every generation that survival depended on humility. Even laughter was quiet near the water, for noise could offend the unseen watchers below. Through reverence, the people found rhythm, the balance between taking and honouring. The river became a temple, and each ripple a living hymn. Fishing for them was prayer made visible, carried in every motion of hand and current. Rituals continued long after the catch was taken. Bones of salmon were placed back into the river to ensure their spirits could guide others home. Children learned to never step over fish remains or toss them carelessly. Such acts might break the cycle of abundance. Songs accompanied every drying rack, chants steady as the smoke that rose from their fires. Among the Ojibwe, stories were told of fish that listened, messengers who could sense whether the people were thankful or wasteful. The Coast Salish spoke of the salmon people, beings who visited human form to see if respect endured. These beliefs weren't superstition but ecology expressed as spirituality. By tying gratitude to behaviour, they preserved their environment without needing written law. Even the smallest gesture, washing hands before touching the fish, or offering water before the meal, kept that awareness alive. Each ritual passed quietly through generations taught that harmony wasn't given, it was maintained through mindfulness. To break that respect was to starve the spirit as surely as the body. Centuries later, the echoes of these rituals survive in story and ceremony. Along riverbanks, descendants still gather to honour the first salmon, repeating gestures first shaped in the age before iron. Drums sound softly, cedar smoke rises, and the same water that once carried their ancestors' prayers continues its endless song. These acts are not relics of the past, but renewals of memory, living proof that gratitude can sustain life. For the people of the rivers, reverence was never symbolic. It was survival itself, the promise that what is respected endures. The mastery of fishing did not end at the riverbank. It began in the workshop of earth and patience. Long before iron or rope, the Coast Salish, Haida, and Ojibwe shaped their world from bone, stone, and wood. Flint and chert were chipped into cutting edges, while ribs of elk or caribou became barbed points for harpoons. Cedar was split into shafts, its straight grain prized for balance and strength. Women prepared sinew cords, stretching and drying them in the sun until they gleamed like gold. Every material was alive with purpose. Nothing was wasted or treated carelessly. A single harpoon might require days of carving and testing, each curve shaped by memory rather than measurement. Tools were not merely objects. They were relationships between hand and land. Each tribe held design secrets, passed in whispers during the long winters, refined through centuries of trial. Even fire was a tool, used to harden wood or heat stone for shaping. When the work was done, the craftsman ran his thumb along the point, not to test its sharpness, but to thank it for what it would provide. Skill, patience, and respect turned raw nature into the instruments of life. Among the Ojibwe, the making of fish-drying racks and smoking frames was as respected as the hunt itself. Cedar poles were chosen carefully, cut only from trees offered by the forest. Never the first, never the tallest. These poles were lashed with strips of bark, tightened by hand without iron or nails. Women often led this work, their knowledge of tension and weight honed through years of observation. On the coast, Haida artisans shaped bone awls for weaving traps, polishing them on smooth stones until they shone like ivory. Even children helped, gathering fibres and smoothing shafts with shells. The rhythm of crafting filled the air, scraping, binding, soft laughter. Each tool carried a story: who made it, which storm season it endured, and whose hands repaired it. Nothing left their workshop without prayer or intention. The process of creation was as sacred as the act of fishing itself. In shaping tools, they shaped memory, leaving behind not just implements but the blueprint of survival. A record written in wood and stone long before words found paper. Fragments of these tools still emerge from riverbanks. Bone points, worn awls, fire-darkened shafts. Each carries the fingerprint of a forgotten artisan. Their craftsmanship reveals more than utility. It reveals belief, that every tool was a covenant between creator and creation. These people did not dominate their environment. They collaborated with it. Theirs was a technology guided by humility, born from listening rather than conquering. Even in silence, the old tools speak, of wisdom shaped by patience, and of hands that built not just to survive but to belong. For the Coast Salish, Haida and Ojibwe, the river was more than a source of life. It was life itself. Every current carried memory, every season a lesson. They took what was needed, gave thanks for what was given, and left the rest to flow onward. This balance was not written in lore or story alone, but lived daily through behaviour. To them, harmony was not perfection. It was participation, knowing when to act and when to let the river lead. Children were taught to listen before touching the water, to notice the bird's direction and the cloud's reflection before stepping forward. Elders spoke of the river's moods, its joy in spring floods, its silence in winter freeze. These metaphors were not poetry, they were practice. By treating water as kin, they ensured its generosity never ceased. Their greatest invention was restraint, a discipline rooted in gratitude. They believed the river had memory, and that every respectful act, every soft footstep was recorded in its current. When they waded into the shallows, they stepped into a living history, one that moved, sang, and remembered them. Even after centuries of change, echoes of that relationship remain. Along the coasts and lakes today, descendants still gather each season to fish, sing, and offer cedar to the current. Their nets may have changed, but their prayers have not. The same rivers that once mirrored fires of smokehouses now reflect aluminum canoes and modern hands. Yet the intention endures, to coexist rather than consume. The rhythm of casting and pulling, the sound of water against skin, still carries the old wisdom forward. These traditions are not nostalgia, but resistance, living proof that a people can honour the past without being trapped in it. When elders speak of balance, they mean the delicate agreement between human hunger and the planet's patience. Modern science now echoes what they knew long ago, that health begins where respect lives. In every region where these traditions survive, the act of fishing remains sacred, not for sustenance alone, but for continuity. It is remembrance cast into the water, retrieved as faith. The river still flows, its current whispering through stone and time. What the ancestors learned by listening endures in every shimmer of light, every returning salmon, every hand that pauses before the cast. Harmony, once a lesson of survival, is now a legacy of wisdom. The people and the water remain entwined, each shaping the other's path, and as the rivers remember their names, so too do the people remember their duty, to walk softly, to take humbly, to give thanks. For in honouring the water they continue to honour themselves.